It's rather bright up here. So good afternoon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this afternoon session. I have to say that starting after lunch is maybe not the most chosen slot to have, but we'll do our best to try and keep you going. It's a privilege to be here because the organisation that I work for, Shell, sponsored the inaugural workshop, the International Agreement Workshop on International Standards a year or two ago. So it's a pleasure to be reconnected with this agenda. You've already heard much about cookstoves in the context of standards and setting today already, and many of the speakers on the podium have referred to that. This panel session, I hope, will deepen it. We'll get a chance to, or I'll get a chance to ask questions of my guests on the podium here, and hopefully we can deepen insight and knowledge on the whole standards, testing, and driving the change that we need to do to move it forward to completion. Now, standards come in many guises. I think from my standpoint, regulations are often standards. You have international standards, you have national standards, but also you have voluntary codes that exist within industries. And I think all are very important for creating a level playing field that makes the marketplace understandable for investors, manufacturers, distributors, etc. Yeah. I think that's very true in the energy sector where I work. I think many of you will recognise in the very public world that we work in that regulation standards and practices are ever present, and they've helped guide the industry. And you may probably will recognise places where non-compliance with those standards has led to undesirable outcomes. And I think the cooking and the clean cooking sector is no different. I firmly believe that policymakers, investors, manufacturers and customers alike will all benefit from this common basis that we establish here through the Global Alliance to eliminate health issues, but to improve safety, quality, efficiency and durability of the products. But at the same time, not at the expense of innovation and advancement, which will be vital for the development and continued success of the sector. Now, in the Alliance's first phase, significant progress has been made on standards through the International Standards Organisation and the establishment of the new ISO Technical Committee on Clean Cooking Solutions. And through this committee, interim guidelines have already been formulated, which are being used to progress the sector in development of cleaner, more efficient and safer technologies. And this framework provides that platform I mentioned for investors, and it's important the guidelines, these interim guidelines are there while the ISO process plays out to fruition. Now we're going to discuss with the panellists about the impact these standards have on the cooking sector. The panellists representing the standards world, the investment community, manufacturers and the testing organisations. And as mentioned earlier, the journey is far from complete, so we'll also be able to hear from what the panellists believe will be necessary to bring the standards work to fruition and the implementation of them thereafter. So I'd like to introduce my panellists, my colleagues on the podium. So first of all, we have Professor Victoria Cortes from, and I'm going to struggle with the name, Zamorano University in Honduras. Victoria has been very responsible and very active in the world of testing. Much has been done in her institution to advance the quality of testing, both in terms of laboratory and field work, and I'm sure we'll get your pearls of wisdom as we go through the next 40 minutes or so. I also like to introduce next to Victoria, Gary Hattem, who's MD of Deutsche Bank Americas. Gary and his organisation have been strong supporters of the Alliance from the get-go, particularly in helping with impact investment and advice on scaling the sector, which is very much what the second phase of the Alliance is about. Then next to Gary, we have Rob Steele. I think many of you might recognise Rob, but he's the Secretary General of the International Standards Organisation, representing 165 countries around the world. ISO has embraced this challenge greatly, and we're looking forward to Rob's thoughts and insights on how ISO has embraced this rather unique and multifaceted challenge. And last but not least, at the end, we have Ben West. Ben represents one of the manufacturers and entrepreneurs in this sector, and I think he will bring a refreshing perspective to the panel discussions. Ben is the founder and CEO of EcoZoom, a social enterprise that designs, manufactures, and sells improved cookstoves. And reading your bio, Ben, I did the statistics that you've seen in 3 years a 25-fold increase in your revenues. I thought that was something that my sector certainly hasn't seen for a long time. And you're predicting healthy sales, nearly $20 million by the end of this year. So obviously you've got a lot to share with us in this space. So enough with the introductions. I'd like to now open with my first set of questions. And I hope that this certainly represents the thoughts that you've got in the room. If time permits, I may take a question or two from the audience, but we have clipped this session by 15 minutes and due to the slight overrun that we're working with. So we'll just see where we go. So Rob, can I start with you? From what we understand, what I understand, many stakeholders have been involved in the ISO process. Why is such a multi-stakeholder process so important? And what's uniquely different about this Cookstoves one?
So thanks, David. And firstly, thanks to the Alliance for the invitation to come here today. The ISO process relies really heavily on complete stakeholder engagement. In other words, if you have an interest, then you should be represented in the process. If you're not, then basically some of the issues around having an international standard immediately are put at risk. If you don't have consumers at the table helping develop the standard, then how are you going to implement the standard to consumers? If you don't have the industry there who are manufacturing the cookstove, how are you going to get their perspective and build that into the standard? The same with the regulators, the same with the researchers, the entrepreneurs and all the rest of it. And in ISO's case, at an international level, what we are looking for is broader representation, not just amongst the stakeholders, but across countries as well. So within the technical committee, TC285, that's looking at this, we have now 36 countries involved, and one of the wishes that ISO would have would be to see if we can increase that number still further. So to answer your question directly, if we don't have the stakeholders at the table, not only do we not have a good standard, we also run the risk, I think, around is it relevant? Is it coherent? Does it build for consensus? And as a result of that, have we got a very good launch platform to actually put this out into the marketplace and have it implemented? Standards are very pragmatic. They're not designed to sit on the shelf. They're designed to be used.
Oh, thank you. Well, if I can build on that, Gary, bringing you in, why would the investment community be so interested in global standards like these?
Yeah, I think there's general agreement at this pivot for the Global Alliance that really private sector capital is going to be necessary to drive this industry to scale. And what's been unique about the Global Alliance is really they invited the private sector in at the get-go to make sure that we were partners in the development of this ecosystem. And standards are incredibly important from an investor's point of view. One, in terms of how we look at companies, how we underwrite them, how we measure them against one another, so that our working capital facility that we arrange with the Global Alliance, one of our covenants and who we lend to is where they stand in terms of their measuring of their product and how we align our covenants to make sure that they continue to aspire to improve the performance. So it's a wonderful underwriting tool in terms of managing risk, in terms of how these products or services will perform in the marketplace alongside their competitors. So in that way, it really provides consistency. And importantly, there really is a paradigm shift among investors who are looking not just for financial returns, but are looking for other mission returns, and certainly being able to measure those returns in a very uniformed way so that our investors know for certain what are the climate impacts of those investments, what are the health impacts of those investments, and how do you not look at them at a company level, but how do you look at them at an aggregated level for the industry overall. It's hugely beneficial from an investor's point of view, and very important, as mentioned, that investors at the table from the beginning to really use this as a tool so that capital really compels better performance.
Gary, thank you. It might be music to your ears, Ben, to hear that confident words from the financial sector. But I also heard words like consistency. So let me ask a question to you. I mean, why do manufacturers and distributors participate in this process? Because if consistency is what's been drive for, does that not take out the ability to innovate and compete from the marketplace?
Well, for us, I mean, we participate really to try to provide, context for the commercial sector. A lot of the participants are government organizations and policy groups, and I think there's a lot of people really tied into the health side, which I think is also really important. And so for us, I think it's very important to provide scale to these solutions as well. So, commercial capital is very important for that. And so we have a barrage of stakeholders to make happy, to raise money and grow the company. And but with that, we have to manage cash inflows as well as cash outflows, of course. And so standards are a very important component of it, but they need to make sense for the commercial sector as well. And I think the mission of what the standards want to achieve fits in perfectly with what we want to do as an organization. Our mission is to deliver the maximum impact to as many homes as possible and as a commercially sustainable way as possible. I think we all want to see, the cooks, the moms and kids and everybody reducing their exposure and not having to collect as much fuel and things like that. Another thing that's quite exciting for us, I think, is that it brings the whole group, the stakeholders along, and so that's where I think innovation comes in quite a bit. It's one thing to have the standards available and done and to know that everyone wants to work for a tier 3 or 4 stove or something even higher perhaps. But getting there is something else completely. Actually getting it out to homes, making it financially a good solution for households, and all the little things in between, training of trainers, market capacity building, making distributors understand why it's important, and all these other little things, aside from just financial stability as well. So that it's good to be involved, and we've enjoyed it so far. Yeah.
So thank you. Let me stick with the financial side of this just for a second. Gary talks about healthy investment climate. You talk about it being important. But cookstoves are large volume, low yielding products. So in that context, Gary, can you deepen your thoughts about why the financial sectors would want to be in this business and supportive of the sector?
Yeah, so I can reflect on our own experience at Deutsche Bank in the microfinance sector. About 15 years ago, we organized our first fund to support the growth of microfinance institutions before there was any commercial interest in the sector. Over those past 15 years, we've seen it come from a largely donor-driven industry to one that is really fueled by private capital. So we see this as the beginning of a marketplace that could potentially be very, very large. And interesting to us is its ability to really drive growth in the SME sector in countries that really rely on small enterprises to grow their economy. We see it as a way to scale up traditional micro entrepreneurs to participate in the economy in a broader way. The global capital marketplaces work very differently now, that there really are a number of institutional investors, high net worth individuals, family officers that really want to pursue impact investing. There's not many sectors where you can deliver health returns, environmental returns, and economic development with clarity and transparency around standards. So I think it's a sector that's really ripe for growth. Just reflecting once again on the microfinance sector, we actually had to play a little bit of catch up after the industry grew so fast and return to the issue of client protection and ensuring that no harm was done through microfinance because it proved so commercially viable. I think here we have the opportunity from being at the ground level to really insinuate into this the highest standards in terms of performance, in terms of local impact. So for us, that's very meaningful.
No, thank you. Well, let me just segue into testing and bring Victoria into the conversation. With this growing interest from investors on the back of these guidelines, what do you see as the role of testing centres in this sector?
Okay, thank you, David. And I want to take this opportunity to thank the Global Alliance to give us the opportunity to share the experiences of a testing center. We are a regional testing center. It is placed in Honduras at the University of Zamorano. And in Latin America, we just have 3 testing centers. 2 of them are placed in Bolivia. The other one is placed in Peru. And we have the one in Honduras that is directed by by the university. And the thing is, like, the importance of a testing center is the thing that the things that you cannot measure, you cannot control. So when you don't have a tool that you can have, for example, a tool that helps you to measure the performance, the efficiency, and of course the goals that you want to accomplish around the technology, so you will have the development of a technology, but without having indicators or efficient indicators. In this case, testing knowledge helps you to create a culture, an active culture of testing and evidence decisions. So you will have the data, you will have all these resources that helps you to take the right decision around a goal that you want to accomplish. This could be, for example, the reduction of emissions, the reduction of the use of the firewood, and it could be, of course, the efficiency on heat transfer or whatever you want around that technology that you are developing. So the testing center is an important tool that will help to the government, the NGOs, the companies that are building all this technology, and of course the users, because you can also have this testing center that can go far away from just having the testing of this technology. You will also have, for example, this tool as a way to measure other aspects, such as social adoption, as an example, and of course, as an health impact into the adoption of this technology. So I think that this is one of the main goals that a testing center has all around this improve Cookstoves adoption and implementation around all of these countries.
Thank you, Victoria. I'd like to stay with you, if I may. As you look at the work that you do in testing, and you look at the normal role of institutions like university, is about knowledge. Mm-hmm. So what do you see as the role of testing centres beyond just the testing and the science?
Okay, and this is a kind of a wonderful question, because considering that this particular testing center belongs to a university, we have the opportunity to develop a lot of research around the testing center. And this is not just around, measuring just the efficiency of a stove, but we also have the opportunity to make some research on design, research on, for example, on the strategy that it's made by a government, by a country, in order to accomplish this technology. We have the ability to follow up the process of this, for example, the success of a different on a specific project according to the goals that they had already established at the beginning. And as a testing center and as a knowledge center, we can help the government and the NGOs to make better decisions on the strategies for the future of this technology. What is going on with the future, and what can we expect around this implementation through the next years? And I think that this is the testing center has to be it cannot be like just a place when you can just receive the stove, measure its efficiency, but also you can go beyond that. You can go with different aspects, because this kind of topic is so rich, and because of its diversity, because it has cultural aspects, it has, for example, technological aspects, and also social and health and fuel. And that is the paper of a testing center. How can we contribute to have better technology, to have different access of fuels, to have a better adoption of the technology, and of course to minimize our environmental impacts and also health issues?
Thank you. So wider knowledge base growing in institutions like that. I'm interested, Ben, your views as from a business point of view, how you see the testing centres, this growth of possibly a knowledge base. What leverage or not does that offer you as a businessman?
Well, I think that the development of the testing centers is great. I think that having good access to testing and knowing how stoves perform is incredibly important. I think for me, there's a bit more of a fear, I suppose, around how high-tiered or well-performing cook stoves get into homes, and how testing goes from the lab to the field or gets involved when monitoring and evaluation efforts and things like that. So I think the standards that are being developed and the people involved with them are very credible, and I think that they'll work out really well. I know that there's some improvements to do still, but I'm confident they'll all get worked out. I think to me, the big question is how they go into households, how that gets involved with monitoring evaluation programs around if cooks are using the stoves and things like that. But I mean, there's obviously a great business opportunity there as well. I mean, if you can create the business models to bring high-tier cook stoves into homes, for us it'll be really great for achieving our mission as an organization. But I think it's great to see all of the desire and the interest behind that as well from the stakeholders that have been here today. I just think Gina from the EPA was talking about how the rules have to be set for market generation and creation. And I think that that's a really important characteristic as we move up the ladder to higher tiered stoves. But I think Anita Shankar as well from the afternoon session really helped lay out that it's really not just about having the product and having it tested to do well in the lab, but actually having it in the home and all of the work that goes into that as well.
Here on the implementation piece, because that's where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. But let me be provocative, Ben. I'll stay with you. I mean, one of the things that's come out of the testing work that's been done so far was the publishing of the Clean Cooking Catalogue. So as a manufacturer of stoves, what's your view on this public kind of disclosure on performance of particular stoves?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, you can participate if you want, right? Like, if somebody has a cook stove they're developing or in an R&D stage, or if you want to take the approach of Apple or something, maybe that's how you announce your new product coming out, is you can register it and something like that. But I think it's voluntary, so I think it's great to have the information there so people can compare. But if you're not ready to go to market with it for whatever reason, I mean, you don't have to post it. But I think people knowing how stoves perform is incredibly important. So we definitely would participate.
Rob, do you have a different perspective or a similar perspective on disclosure, performance disclosure?
I think the standards world thrives on this openness, this inclusion, this building of consensus. And the more information you have in the marketplace, the better the market is informed, which I think leads to a virtual circle. And I think in the standards world, this is very important because standards are not static. That's the other point. A couple of the speakers this morning were saying, the ideal might be out here somewhere, but we can only be here. Well, I think that's just fine, because I think if you're trying to reach for the moon, if you do it in stages, then you are going to get there. And I think this marketplace needs to move at a pace that people can absorb, that people can afford, and people can understand and implement. And so for me, I think the more information in the marketplace, the better it is. In the standards world, and in this particular technical committee, I think the other point I would like to make is that this seems to be moving very fast in terms of research, new ideas, new technologies, new ways of implementing these things. And I think that also fits very well in the standards process. In ISO, if a standard goes for 5 years, then it actually has to be looked at, because we would anticipate that a standard would be reviewed and perhaps amended within a 5-year period. In some cases, perhaps outside of this sector, that wouldn't be true, but it seems to me that it's very true for this sector. And that I think is why the technical committee is working on the 4 areas that it is. I think it's very interesting, the wording that they've used for the titles for each of these 4 areas. They're talking about conceptual framework for Cookstoves testing protocols and performance indicators. It's quite wide. It allows, I think, people to grow. Similarly with the next one, harmonized laboratory testing protocols, which you were just talking about. The third one, field testing methods, not a method, methods. And the final one, which I think is really important and which I think a number of the speakers raised this morning, is the social impact. And in this particular case, the assessment guidelines around social impact that I think are also very important. I'm finding in the standards world and ISO, this word sustainability, and perhaps it's a little overused, but I think in this context as well, it's very true. Here we're driving, I think, as a sector, as consumers, as interested parties, towards having economic sustainability. Can you build the market for finance? Can you build the market for production of cookstoves and all the rest of it? Environmental performance. Are you actually looking at greenhouse gas emissions? You need standards to measure them, but what are you expecting in terms of impact? And I think very importantly, societal sustainability or society sustainability. What is going to work in one part of the world is not going to work in another for cultural reasons or whatever it might be. And the standard, I think, needs to allow that flexibility, because otherwise it's going to sit on the shelf and it's just not going to be used.
Well, thank you. I was going to ask you a question about, because there are many different facets to this. I think you've covered that. There's the fuel, there's the stove design, there's the emissions, and so on and so forth. But has that presented extra challenges to ISO in terms of how you've gone about driving the standards work?
I think what's really exciting about this work, this subject, and now the technical committee that's been formed is ISO, I think, has become, dare I say, slightly innovative itself. We have a thing called twinning. Basically what you have is you have a developed country twinning with an emerging economy. In this case, it's the United States, which I think has got a lot of the technology area, like a lot of the technology drivers, but also Kenya. And we've heard from several speakers today from Kenya. In ISO's case, we're twinning at the secretary level. So actually driving the standards development process itself. And between Kenya and the United States, this I think is great. It allows for, I think, a sympathetic view of how the standard should be developed. From an ISO perspective, it also allows for technology transfer on how you actually run the process. Because I would hope that in the future, KEBS, the Kenyan Bureau of Standards, would actually take even more responsibility than they are now. The other innovation, I think, and this is where partnership comes in very, very strongly, the alliance in terms of getting developing countries to the table by providing financial assistance to get those representatives there. I think the fact of encouraging developing countries to get actively engaged is something that is really welcome by ISO and absolutely critical for this particular subject area.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to digress from the process now, because I'm going to save some of my questions for the end. I'm going to come to the audience and say, is there anyone, while we've got my guests on the podium, who's got a burning question on standards and testing they'd like to ask? If you put your hand up, there's roving mics out there. I can't see with the lights, but there's a question in the middle here, I think. Maybe introduce yourself and then your question.
My name is Dana Sharon. I'm with Berkeley Air Monitoring Group. And I'm interested to hear comment from the gentleman from ISO. We heard in the previous session, we heard from the World Bank that they view a part of their role as developing standards in the countries where they're working. And I'm wondering on your comments on how those processes get integrated or how you see the relationship between ISO working with multilaterals like the bank. Thank you.
So thank you very much for the question. I don't see any incompatibility with what the World Bank is trying to do. I think that it's very important that ISO is not seen as being the only standards organization in the world. That's silly. Where I think we have a role to play is as an international harmonizer of standards. So, for example, ISO has about 650 liaison organizations with which we work very closely. The Alliance is a very good example. The LPG Association is another. The World Bank actually is another. And we have others, including, relevant to this area, the World Health Organization and the like. So they are all developing their own standards, or some of them are at least. And I think ISO's role is to actually take the best of the best and see if we can look for international harmonization. I think if the World Bank has got a mix of finance and development things, then I think ISO perhaps can take that and provide perhaps broader perspectives of interest to other sectors or places of interest. But the World Bank is an organization that we do work with quite a lot as well.
Thank you for your question. Are there other questions that might emerge in the audience? There's a hand going up here. If we can get the microphone across. Put your hand up high so they can see where you are.
In your ISO, how do you control the company as well as the technology both together combining? Because so far I know the ISO mostly talks about how do you control the process, right? So if someone defines the process and that's how they have to maintain the whole system. So how do you incorporate this production and the technology as well?
Thank you for the question. If you're having trouble getting to sleep at night, can I invite you to go to the ISO website, and you'll be able to find the ISO IEC directives. They are 2 volumes, if you were to print them out, about this thick each, and they are detailed rules by which we build consensus and develop standards. More seriously, what we are trying to do in ISO is we're trying to get all of the stakeholders around the table. And when I say the table, there are actually 2 tables. There is a table of the technical committee experts who meet and develop the standard. But those people around that table should be bringing forward ideas from other tables. So each of the countries that are involved in developing work in this particular area are invited through the ISO member to set up what we call mirror committees. So in the country, so if it was Bangladesh, or if it was India, or if it was Peru or Guatemala or whatever it might be, you would also have the same type or representation of stakeholders in that country. So you would have industry, regulators, academia, and all the rest of it. So we're actually building a double level of consensus. We're looking for consensus within the ISO member and bringing forward those ideas into the technical committee to looking for international consensus as well. This is why it's really important that all of the stakeholders are involved, so that you don't have a misrepresentation or over-representation perhaps from one particular sector or another. And that has been an issue for ISO. It will continue to be an issue for us. And this is why it's a very open invitation. ISO, my organization, we are deeply in love with the process, but we are actually very how can I say it, unbiased about who should be at the table. We would like everybody to be at the table, that has an interest in this thing, because I think it strengthens the resultant standard.
Thank you for the question, Rob, also the response. I think we've got time for one last question. Maybe not directed at Rob, so he can get his breath back, but are there any other questions? Oh, a lady in the back, I think.
Thank you. On the ISO working group for Clean Cookstoves, there are 2 representatives representing the solar cooking sector. But a question I had for any of you who've been involved in cookstoves, because solar cookers have no emissions and they use no fuel, does it make sense to have them as part of this standards, or would it be more logical to have a separate set of standards for solar cookers?
So maybe we'll ask you, Victoria, to respond to that one.
Yes. I'm going to explain a little bit about the case of Honduras. We are a part of the ISO committee that is discussing already the standards. And we are the representatives in behalf of Honduras of the the Honduran Normalization Institute. We are representing Honduras in this committee. And we also have the mirror committee in Honduras that gather all these companies that are building and the national standard organization. And the thing is, like, we had this discussion precisely during the last meeting that we had at Guatemala. And we decide that it's needed, that we need to have separate standards because of there are huge differences between the different models of stoves. For example, and these differences are linked to the culture of every country. For example, South America, they used to have the stoves that are on direct fire. And in Honduras and Mexico, we use mostly the plancha stove. And we have, when you are evaluating those different models, you will have differences that will make you think that one model is less effective than the other one, or the performance is it's worse from one to another. But the thing is, like, that the technologies are different, the design is completely different. So you cannot apply the same protocol for both stoves. And that's the thing that we decided as a committee of the harmonized group, that we need to have different standards for different models. And that is one of the recommendations, that we need to gather the models and the characteristics of these particular models in order to have a protocol and a standard for evaluation. Otherwise, you will have a big group of stoves that will be like in a very low level of performance. If you have to have the same, for example, standard for every design or every model.
Thank you, Victoria. Anyone got anything to build or add to the response?
While I agree with that, I think it's very good to have a framework that you can put some of these protocols or testing methods or whatever it is in place, so that you don't end up with a huge range of standards across a whole series of countries where you don't have a possibility for comparability. So I think having overarching protocols and what have you, which is where I think the technical committee and ISO is looking at, I think is very important. I think having that framework that you can put things in place for, and then if there is a need for regional or national or particular cultural differences, you build those within those protocols as well. But I think people are looking for a roadmap, they're looking for guidance, and they're looking for harmonization as much as possible without stifling innovation. As the Secretary General of ISO, I can assure you that the word innovation and the word standards actually can exist in the same sentence.
Glad to hear it. Let me bring the questioning back to me now, as we got the last 5 minutes to wrap. But a question to Gary and to Ben. So I'll take you can decide who answers first. But one of the things that, of course, I'm projecting investors will want is continuous innovation and improvement. So what sort of thoughts do you have around how we instill a continuous improvement mindset into the sector? And it's not just getting a stove done there, tick, and that's it. How do we continue to build that improvement?
Yeah, so maybe I'll just start. One way is just this really has to hit the market in a way that succeeds. So consumers want to use the product, and you want them to stick with the product, and you want at a certain point of time for them to trade up to a better product. So I think that there really is a need to create a marketplace that continues to grow and evolve and develop, and it's going to be done differently in each country incrementally. So just to make sure the standards kind of allow for that evolution of the sector, I think is really important. I would say also that there's a unique value proposition here that we need to monetize so that investors see that companies that can achieve carbon credits as a source of revenues, that perhaps there's other ways to monetize the health benefits, that the standards need to think about the market opportunities that are being created for capital flows, as well as the performance of the product. So just a way to think about standardization in a little bit of a different way.
Yeah, thanks. I think I'll take it a bit more downstream from us to the user. So I would definitely agree. You know, it needs to make business sense for the company, and that can be from sales price of the product or other subsidies or things like that as well. But I think a really big factor is how to make it work, how to create value down the stream as well. So I think as we move higher in tier stoves, it'll be really important to create value in the whole value stream. So for example, we might really like tier 4 cookstoves, but a user can buy our current stove and save about as much fuel as a really nice pellet stove, for example, right? And so for the user, they've made their economic advantage. I don't know what else they might value really that would help them move up into a cleaner burning stove. And so that's a really big factor, right? So the market is making decisions around the money that they can save, but then from a policy and industry perspective, we all want to also impact and create social value. But users right now don't necessarily value that. And so I think that there's a lot of value creation to do as we move up the ladder. And I think that everybody here, this is a small portion of the overall industry, of course, that's here today. Tier 2 cookstove programs are really starting to scale, I would say. I don't know of a lot of tier 3 or 4 cookstove programs that are doing big numbers. I definitely don't know everything going on in the space though. But to get there is going to require a lot of work, a lot of proof of concept, a lot of case studies, efficacy stories, other things like that to make investment into those programs work. There is a lot of money going into tier 1 and tier 2 cookstove programs now to touch millions of homes, which is great. But to make that happen with tier 3 and 4 programs, I think you have to have the product and then the business models and the efficacy stories to prove it to funders to hit big scale with those systems as well.
Well, thank you. I'm going to ask some closing question. Well, I'm going to ask 3 of you a closing question, and then I'm going to leave the last question for Rob. But to Victoria, Ben, Gary, my question to you, and each in turn, is: so as we move forward with the standards agenda, we're not there yet, yeah, and there's much work that needs to be done. So what would you say, and what would be your advice on the key kind of priorities that the standards work's got to deal with to propel it fastly, that's not good English, to a quick conclusion, or as rapid a conclusion as you can in the standards world?
Okay, I will say that the quality standards are a culture that has to be adopted by every country. When you have your decisions based on standards, you will acquire a high quality products. So you will need to have a policy, a national policy that will promote the use of these standards. And this policy must be promoting the uses of high quality products in order to reach the goals of adopting any kind of technology. So I think that one of the things that we need to have is like a standard and a national standard, first of all, that will push all this, the rest of the strategy that will help you and that will help us to adopt in a right way all this improved Cookstoves technology. So,
Yeah, I would just say the standards as a tool to really equip entrepreneurs to be successful, that it really needs to be a tool for the industry's growth and the success of enterprises. So I would just leave it at that.
I definitely agree with Victoria. I think the culture needs to permeate the entire industry, all the levels of stakeholders. I think that within that, access to testing, of course, is very important from a cost perspective in the regional testing centers and timeliness. But I think mostly, just inputting that culture.
Okay, thank you. I said I would leave the last question to you, Rob. And it's more to do with multi-stakeholder engagement when you have big groups together trying to drive for consensus and alignment. What is ISO going to be doing to avoid any stagnation in the work that's necessary to be done to get this to a final landing platform?
One of the things that I think is fascinating about this technical committee, and what I've been told certainly, is the passionately held views by different groups with interest in the sector. I think it's really important for ISO to listen. We need to let people have their say. We need to have other people hear what those people say, and then we need to drive for consensus. And in ISO, consensus doesn't mean 100% unanimity of view. It means absence of sustained opposition. So it's a very useful definition of consensus for moving things forward. And the reason for that is, as I said before, standards are not static. It's not as if you're going to have a one-time debate that's going to stay in place for all time. And I think that this flexibility is really important. I think two other things are very important. One is really good project management. I think people need to sign up. Yeah, I'm going to come into this process and I'm going to do my best to help the process, not to stand in the way of the process. And finally, I think ISO has some great people involved in this particular technical committee. If I may, I'd like to particularly acknowledge the chair, Dr. Rainey Chang, who is somewhere in this room. Somewhere. Where she is. And I'm not sure if one of the secretaries is here. I know one of the other secretaries is here. Sally Seitz from the United States, and the other one is Zachariah Lucaruto. Having great people involved in driving this process is what it's all about. Because standardization, as I said at the start, is not esoteric. It's very pragmatic, and it actually is all about people.
Thank you, Rob. The last word's with me, as always, because I'm chairing. But I just want to say that, I mean, the standards testing has permeated the conference and the summit so far. And I think it just stands as testament to the fact that it is a springboard to accelerate the whole agenda of Cookstoves, clean cooking, and the environmental health, livelihood benefits that we all aspire to have. And without it, we won't get there fast enough. With it, it's essential. So to my panelists, Victoria, gentlemen, thank you very much for participating in the standards and testing session, and we'll draw a line underneath this session. Thank you very much.